Okay, so now let's discuss why humans really like to embrace pseudoscientific claims. I'm going to use an example, the Phoenix Lights. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time sort of setting up what actually happened in the skies over Arizona back in 1997. And then I'm going to let you watch a little video that talks about it, and then we'll come back and analyze it sort of scientifically. So first, let me give you the setup. So as you can see, this is a news clipping from 1997. So there were actually two events that occurred over Arizona on March 13th, 1997. Apparently people were out at a higher rate that night because they were out looking for the Hale-Bopp comet that came by that night. So people were outside and they were looking up, hoping to see the comet go by. And in addition to, or instead of seeing the comet, they saw some kind of freaky things. So the first thing that happened was between 8:15 and 8:45 p.m., a V-form, kind of as what is depicted in this drawing on the right-hand side, passed overhead across the state of Arizona from northwest corner over the state to the southeast corner. So let me real quick, kind of, for those of you who are not Arizonans. So somewhere over here is where it was first spotted, and then it proceeded over. And the last place that it was actually spotted was somewhere down in the Tucson area. And it took about 30 minutes to make this trip. And as you could see in the newspaper article, it looks like a V with lights along it. So, like it says here, skies and phone lines light up in Arizona. People started calling the news. They started calling Air Force bases, trying to figure out what this giant object was. And they were saying it was like a mile wide. And they reported that it was moving really slowly. So they thought it was hovering more than it was really passing over them. Now, a witness with a telescope said, oh, I looked at that, because he was out there looking for Hale-Bopp comet, and he saw this thing go by, and he looked at it, and he said it was individual airplanes flying in a V formation. It wasn't a solid object like other witnesses were reporting. Now, how could that be? You might be thinking to yourself, how could people be perceiving individual lights as having a solid mass between them? It's a psychological principle called closure, where you actually, your brain, your perceptual system takes the information coming in through sensation, and in its effort to impose meaning on it and figure out what it's actually witnessing, it fills in some blanks. And so if you imagine that these are regular airplanes flying in a V formation and that there are lights on the planes, like, planes have, those lights would kind of dim the stars, right? Like you know how if there's a light, you can't really see the stars behind them. So the fact that the light emanating from one plane kind of extends a certain distance, the light emanating from the plane next to it is sort of extending a little bit. It sort of dims out those stars behind it, and your brain goes, oh, that must be a solid object actually blotting out those stars. And your brain fills it in and closes that gap. So the idea that it was individual airplanes and that just the witnesses without telescopes couldn't perceive it like that, that actually makes sense. It actually psychologically makes a lot of sense. In Prescott, Arizona, they reported that they could actually hear jet airplanes. So other witnesses had said that it was silent, but the witnesses in Prescott said we could hear jet engines. So it probably wasn't silent. It probably was jet engines that, the people who said that it was silent, maybe they had other sounds obscuring their ability to detect it. Arizona has really clear air. And so maybe the planes were farther away than they thought they were. Maybe they seemed closer visually, and so the sound wasn't reaching them. Maybe the wind was blowing the other direction, so the sound was being blown away from the witnesses. I mean, there are a lot of factors that could make it so that some witnesses could hear it and some witnesses couldn't hear those jet engines. And then the last piece of evidence that it was probably airplanes is that it wasn't really hovering. It was traveling at a rate of speed that is very consistent with jet planes. The assumption is that it was probably military aircraft that were part of a covert, I don't know if that's the right word, classified, I guess is the right word, classified activity that was going to be happening in southern Arizona that night. And so they were probably traveling, under a little bit of cover. They weren't necessarily heralding their arrival. So this is what we like to call the first event of the night. This V-shaped formation of probably jet airplanes moving across the state being reported by witnesses. The next thing, the second event that happened, I forgot to mention, there is no video footage. There is a claim, one guy claims that he had a pretty horrible video footage of it, but it seems to be missing now. So we'll just say for all intents and purposes, there is no video footage of this V-shaped object that passed over the skies. Okay. Now what we'll call the second event happened same night, but now it's about 10 p.m. and it's those lights that you see in the foreground are the city of Phoenix, and the lights that you're seeing up in the air are the mystery, what we call Phoenix lights. So this string of lights mysteriously appears above the Estrella Mountains. They're the Sierra Estrella Mountains in the Phoenix area. Let's go back to our little map real quick. So if we zoom in a little bit, so here's Phoenix. Here are the Sierra Estrella Mountains right here. So those lights that you're seeing are somewhere hovering this way, and people in Phoenix were looking across at it. Probably people over here in the hills were getting a really good view across from the northeast to the southwest at these lights that were hovering above the Estrella Mountains. So it gives you a little bit of perspective what's going on in the state. All right, so imagine you're standing outside on March 13th, hoping to see the Hale-Bopp comet, or maybe you had heard on the news that there had been this weird V-shaped thing flying over the state and you want to see that or whatever. So you're standing outside. And this picture is sort of midway in the event. What observers saw was those lights coming on one at a time and then being doused one at a time. And what was weird is they came on in a sequence from right to left, but then when they got doused, it was sort of a random sequence. They sort of hopped around. And in fact, do you notice that there's a group of lights all sort of together in the middle of the screen, and then there's one light off by itself on the left side? The lights between those two groups, between that single one and then the rest of the group, had gone out sort of in this random pattern. And I have to say, I'm saying it with a little bit of astonishment, because I have to say, back in 1997, when I saw this footage, it was very freaky. I have to admit, watching the footage and seeing the lights go off in this really random pattern, I was like, what am I seeing? That I don't even know what to do with this. Of course, look at the footage. It's completely dark. There's nothing to root anything to. So, not knowing what the foreground looks like, not knowing what the background looks like, all we have is just blackness and then these lights. I will admit, my first interpretation was that this looked like, see how it kind of looks like an arc? So it looked like a big circular, one unified spacecraft. I'll just admit it. It looked like a giant spacecraft, and that the lights in the windows had come on one at a time. And then it was almost like the passengers inside of the UFO were one by one, like closing their window screens or something. I mean, it's like, my brain didn't know what else to do with it. Like, what else could it be? Okay, well, don't worry. It's going to be something else. But it really took my breath away. It has freaked out a lot of people. And a lot of people still firmly believe that what you're seeing in this picture is a UFO. Okay, now here's what I need you guys to know before I let you watch the video about this event. every single newscast I have ever seen that is attempting to explain what happened on March 13th conflates the two events. So they'll have some witnesses describing the V-shaped formation passing over them, and then other witnesses talking about this string of lights. And you won't be able to tell that one's talking about one event and one's talking about the other event. They are in fact two separate events. So keep that in mind as you watch the piece that I'm going to have you watch. And you're going to hear sort of that sort of possibility that it's a UFO interpretation. And I want you guys to see the lights sort of moving in real life and everything. So I want you to watch the video, and then we'll come back in the next lecture segment and we'll talk about that. It'll just load up after the playlist, and we'll talk about alternative interpretations, and it should be fun. All right.